Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to unpack the incredible machine that is the modern global economy. It's really a story about how our world got rebuilt, how it runs today, and, at the end of the day, how it connects every single one of us in ways we probably don't even think about.
Just think about that phone in your pocket for a second. The answer to how it got there is, well, it's not simple. It's rooted in this massive economic shift that happened over the last century. So in this explainer, we're going to break down exactly how that global machine was built, piece by piece.
All right, so where do we even start? Our story really kicks off in the late 20th century with this powerful new idea, a new philosophy, that completely redrew the economic blueprints for, well, the entire world.
You see, for decades after the Great Depression and World War II, the general thinking was that governments needed to have a really strong hand in the economy. But then, right around the 1980s, this whole new idea started to take over. What if we stepped back? What if we let the free market take the lead?
So in the US, you had leaders like Ronald Reagan who really championed this shift. The idea was pretty straightforward. Scale back the government's role through deregulation and some pretty big tax cuts. Now, the results of this were, and still are, super complex and hotly debated. But one thing is for sure, it tipped the scales, giving more power to capital, that is the owners and investors, and less to labor, which was a big factor in the widening wealth gap.
And right across the pond in Britain, Margaret Thatcher was following a very similar playbook. She went all in on deregulation and famously privatized these huge state-owned companies. We're talking everything from telecom to airlines. And the outcome? Well, it was a trade-off. Inflation was brought under control and the economy grew, but it came at the cost of union power and led to a pretty sharp rise in income inequality.
Okay, but here's the thing. This free market idea, it wasn't some magic bullet you could just apply anywhere and get the same results. When it was tried elsewhere, the outcomes were dramatically different. In China, the government tried to introduce economic freedom without political freedom, a tension that just boiled over at Tiananmen Square. And in Chile, a really brutal shock therapy approach did manage to tame hyperinflation, but it came at an immense social and political cost.
So, you've got these new economic rules starting to take hold all across the globe. The next big question is, where does all the work actually get done? And the answer to that marks another huge transformation.
What happened next was kind of like this great global sorting process. As making things got more and more expensive in wealthier countries, they started to shift their focus. They moved towards what we call a knowledge economy. Design, finance, software, ideas. And this in turn opened up a massive door for developing nations to basically become the world's new factory floor.
Finland is just a perfect case study here. This is a country that completely reinvented itself. By making these really smart, strategic investments in education and technology, it went from being a largely farming-based economy to a global tech powerhouse, famous for things like cell phones and software.
Japan, on the other hand, took a different path, what some people call a mercantilist approach. The strategy was really simple but incredibly powerful. Sell as much stuff as you can to the rest of the world and buy as little as possible from them. This export-first mentality fueled an absolutely incredible economic boom. And over time, Japan also branched out into those knowledge sectors like finance and IT.
And then you've got the US, which is a really fascinating story. You have these private giants we all know, Apple, Microsoft, Google, driving this huge tech boom. But, and this is a big but, it was all built on a foundation of government research. We're talking about agencies like DARPA, which helped create foundational technologies like GPS and, the internet itself.
Which of course brings us to the flip side of this whole thing. The rise of all these knowledge economies meant that the manufacturing work had to go somewhere. And why did it move? Well, at the end of the day, it really came down to one main thing: the hunt for lower labor costs, which was all made possible by new technologies in communication and transportation.
Okay, let's talk about the rulebook. Because to make all this global activity actually work, you need structures to manage it and, in a lot of cases, to speed it all up. These institutions are basically the instruction manual for the whole machine.
First up, you've got the big one, the World Trade Organization, or the WTO. And honestly, the easiest way to think about the WTO is as the global referee for trade. Its main job is to set the rules of the game, to help countries negotiate, and to step in and sort out disputes when they happen. And this is such a great example of how these agreements can grow into something enormous. The European Union, it started as this tiny little pact between a few countries to manage coal and steel, of all things.
And look at it now. It's a massive 27-country single market with just enormous global influence.
And yeah, you see this same idea playing out in other parts of the world. You've got these really powerful regional deals like NAFTA in North America and ASEAN over in Southeast Asia, and they all worked to do pretty much the same thing: lower the barriers to trade and knit the economies in their region closer together. Okay, this is a really crucial point. This whole global shift, it's not just about governments and trade deals. A huge piece of this puzzle is the massive companies that are actually doing the work across borders, often driving this whole interconnected system themselves.
And this is where we meet the multinational corporations, or MNCs for short. And you know the playbook, right? The design and the big ideas happen in a wealthy country, the actual making of the thing happens somewhere where labor is cheaper, and then the final product gets sold, well, pretty much everywhere. These companies are the living embodiment of the global age.
So let's take Nestle. It's a Swiss company, right? But think about just one product, like a chocolate bar. The supply chain for that is just mind-bogglingly complex. You've got cocoa being sourced from West Africa, for example. And while that global reach is incredibly powerful, it also opens up all these really tough questions about labor, about conditions, which is why these supply chains can get so controversial.
Or look at an automaker like Nissan. As a Japanese company, they are literally weaving different economies together. When they build factories and form alliances in North America or Europe or other parts of Asia, they're not just selling cars there. They're transferring technology, they're creating local jobs, they're really embedding themselves into multiple economies all at once.
And this is so important. This isn't just a story about companies from America or Europe or Japan anymore, not by a long shot. You have these powerhouses like India's Mahindra and Mahindra that have become major global forces in their own right. They operate across continents, and they prove that emerging economies aren't just the world's factories anymore. They're home to their own powerful global corporations.
Okay, so we've traced all these different threads, right? The new policies, the way jobs moved around, the big global rule books, the giant corporations. And when you put it all together, you're left with this picture of a world that is more tangled up and interconnected than ever before. And that, of course, brings both good and bad.
Yeah, this deep interconnectedness, it's really a double-edged sword. On one side, you get incredible efficiency, amazing new opportunities, and huge economic growth. But the flip side of that coin is a world that's way more vulnerable to shocks, a world with deepening inequality, and a lot more potential for these big global tensions.
So that leaves us with one last big question to chew on. When you think about this whole tangled web we've just walked through, with all of its incredible benefits and its very real downsides, the question for all of us is, how do we manage to balance that powerful drive for growth with the real need for fairness and stability?